questions about the supply chain continue to roll in. Here's John Phipps.
Tommy Barrett from Hedgesville, West Virginia, has a question about the supply chain. What changes have been or are being made in the farm-to-table supply chain in the USA to better serve consumers if a shutdown occurs again in the future? Are there new safeguards in place to use farm products so the products will not be wasted? Great question, and one that may have a different answer than you might expect. Changes have been implemented to deal with shortages, but not by legislation or regulation so much as by everyone from farmers to consumers in the chain. Perhaps the biggest adjustment has been consumer behavior. Shoppers are modifying their buying habits. We have different expectations from grocery stores and restaurants. Much of what we call shortages, I would label outages. For example, Jan has one particular brand of chicken pot pie she prefers. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. She always checks, and when it's there, she buys some, regardless of whether it's on that week's list now. The same with chicken thighs, chicken broth, pint Ziploc bags, our kind of orange juice, and small cans of corn. Yes, I keep the always checked list on my phone as well, even if I'm at the supermarket for light bulbs. There are more examples, and they change, but consumers are adjusting to sporadic availability. As consumers adapt, panic buying decreases. This in turn makes outages less frequent and briefer. One of the biggest sources of food waste is aesthetic waste, where products, mostly fresh produce, don't look absolutely perfect and they end up being discarded. We're getting over that pickiness as well. More home gardens are really helping there. Processors and shippers are developing alternatives to the most efficient and absolutely cheapest methods as they look at more reliable and expensive ways to supply consumers. Those increased costs are a factor in recent food inflation. Even at the worst of the pandemic shortages, there was no real lack of food, usually just a lack of choice. 2 years of COVID have taught us what the Rolling Stones tried to tell us way back in 1969. You can't always get what you want. As for food waste in the U.S., it has always been scandalously high. Pre-COVID, it was about 40%. Whether the relatively mild effects of the recent food industry turmoil nudges that downward remains to be seen. One final note. One of the most cited reasons behind outages and real shortages has been the great trucker shortage. That may or may not be a real thing, and I'll be looking into that in an upcoming show.
Thank you, John. And you can send your questions to john@mailbag@usfarmreport.com. All right, when we come back, what would you do if you were trapped in a wildfire trying to find a way out? Well, it's a remarkable story of survival and hope that came from the ashes. That Grit with Grace story is next.